All right, so if we're going to try to use Unreal Engine to create visual effects, then the best way to approach this is to make our scenes look just like Hollywood movies. So I picked 3 different screenshots, 3 different environments that we can create to teach us everything we need to know about visual effects for Unreal. So we're going to start with the Batcave from The Dark Knight. We're going to start really simple, but learn some key fundamentals in this lesson. And then I have 2 stills from Raya and The Last Dragon, where we're going to not just use Quixel assets, but learn how to create some assets of our own inside of Unreal Engine using the modeling tools, learn some dramatic lighting, introduce characters, and render this through Movie Render Queue and Sequencer. And then lastly, we're going to create this fantastical environment with particle effects, dramatic lighting, and some really high detail geometry, and put everything together by the end of this course. So let's get started with this shot from The Dark Knight. So if you want to go ahead and navigate to the TDK folder and go to ML_The Dark Knight start. So here we are, we're truly going to start from scratch and just start building everything step by step. So I'll include this image in the description, but just make sure to keep this on standby. And if you have a second monitor, make sure to keep this by your side at all times. For some reason, at a certain point, people think they get too good for reference, but the best pros, the best of the best, use reference as their holy grail, as their Bible, as their true north. So make sure to have it, and we have a couple images here to see what it looks like under different conditions. And through this, we'll learn a little bit about materials, about objects and actors, and we'll even start to dive into blueprints right away and start tackling the game development side of Unreal, building some really basic blueprints, but just to start getting our feet wet and understanding how these work. Most people try to avoid this until the end, but I think it's really important to embrace this in some really simple examples early on so we can start adding on top of our skills by the end of this course. Okay, so we started with this fairly empty scene. All we have are some lights. We'll actually end up deleting all of these, but there's 2 things that we're gonna wanna grab right away. So the first thing that I always like to do in every scene, the first thing every single time, is to add a human for reference. So we know exactly how big the scene we're creating is, and by using a human, usually a 6-foot tall human, because I'm about 6 feet tall, it really helps to immediately understand how big we're creating our scene, especially if our reference has people inside of it as well. If you press the add button here, we can add feature or content packs. And the one that I pick most often is the 3rd person example. So let's just add this to our project. So now if we go to our content example, this is going to add a couple different folders. It's going to add our 3rd person folder, but also our level prototyping and characters folder. Another thing I like to do just to keep everything organized is just drag these inside of our 3rd person folder. One thing to note, when you see these loading screens, it can kind of freak you out at first, but it's just because in Unreal there are so many hard-coded references to other files. When you move something into another folder, Unreal will go through each file and fix all of the hard-coded references. So if you ever want to move files, it's really important to do it inside of Unreal and not just in your File Explorer in Windows, because it's not going to go through and fix all of those references. And a thing that does happen when you open these, all these folders are going to be empty, but they're still going to exist until we refresh Unreal. You can always right-click and hit Fix Up Redirectors, and then that'll empty out that entire folder so you can delete the old folders. And now everything should be consolidated inside of our new 3rd person folder. So if we go into maps, we can see this is our 3rd person map, which is a great test level if you ever need to just throw something in or you want to make a one-off effect like a Niagara particle system. But let's jump back to our level. All right, so let's add in our character. So I'm in the 3rd person folder, and we'll go to Mannequins, Meshes, and then we'll grab our Manny skeleton. So if we look briefly, we can see how this is named as a SKM, skeletal mesh. So a good thing to know is that any character is going to be referred to as a skeletal mesh in Unreal Engine. Skeletal meshes have their own editor. So this is the skeletal mesh editor, and you can see that because we get this little pink icon, which also matches up with the pink color under any skeletal mesh. But we're not going to animate him or do anything fancy for now, so we just want him inside of our scene so that we have a good scale reference. And now if we look at our reference image, we're going to want a concrete for the ground. The ground is a bit more blue and the walls are a bit more yellow, and the walls are a bit patchier. They have these dark lines running down them, some leakage coming from the ceilings and things like that. So let's go into Quixel Megascans and start grabbing some assets. So this is Quixel Bridge, and honestly, this is one of the main reasons I love to use Unreal, is you have so many 3D models and textures at your disposal that are drag and drop. So it's easy to just start cramming a bunch of objects in your scene, but I want to start one thing at a time. So let's go to concrete. Any of these check marks are objects that are already downloaded, so some of these have already gone ahead and tested out. So this damaged concrete floor is pretty interesting. For now, we'll download everything as medium quality. Just so you know, low quality is a 1K texture, medium quality is a 2K texture, high quality 4K, and highest quality is 8K. Practically speaking, you're almost never ever going to download an 8K texture. It's just usually going to be overkill for whatever you're doing. And one of the things that can overload your system fastest is by having too many 4K or 8K textures in your scene. So I like starting with medium quality. You can always go back and grab the higher quality ones later if it's not good enough, but this is a good way to keep your scene lightweight and make it so you don't overload your GPU and start crashing Unreal earlier than you have to. This is essentially what it will look like when we are starting to run out of texture memory. There used to be a texture in our GPU's VRAM, but now it's kind of just turned into raw data. A lot of times this will happen at different LODs, which just means that the closer we get, it'll reveal different textures at different distances. So if anything like this starts to happen, it's a very easy fix. Just restart your engine, restart your computer if it keeps happening. And it does help just to limit the amount of tabs you have in your browser when you have Unreal Engine open. So I'm gonna grab this stained concrete floor, export that, and then I'm also gonna grab this worn painted wall material. Great. And when you're not using Quixel, it can actually take up a lot of memory on your machine, so it's good to close this. Don't keep it minimized if you're not using it. And then this will create some Megascan folders in our content browser. So we have our Megascans, where we have our surfaces. So surfaces are the textures or materials, and then 3D assets are any of the 3D models that you'll have in your scene. And now if we just do a quick comparison between our reference and our scene here, we can see that we probably have to double the size of our floor if they're in the middle, and then we'll have to duplicate it a couple times further down. So right off the bat, let's just change this floor to 2, and then there's 2 different ways we can duplicate an object. The first way is by pressing the Alt key and then clicking on our transform gizmo and dragging that. So this has created a duplicate. The other way, actually there's 3 ways. You can just copy and paste it, and that'll make a duplicate there, or you can right click it and go to edit, duplicate, or which is also Control D as a shortcut. So typically I like to just Alt click and drag here, and then let's just make sure that this is lined up perfectly. If we can see we're snapping by 10, we should set it perfectly at 2000 units, and then we won't have a seam between our floor. So let's now take those Quixel materials and apply them to our floor. So let's double click on our material instance and take a look at our material here. So not every material is set up like this, but we are getting the template of the Megascan materials brought in, which gives us some really easy controls to tint our base color, our albedo, change the specular, roughness, and normals. So let's just take this material and apply it to both of our ground planes. And we can see that right away we get some very obvious tiling. Now anything that we change in our material instance here is going to directly affect what we see in the editor. So we can start to drag some things around and see what these do. So if we want to change our albedo tint, we can click and drag this here, or we can change our saturation and set it to 5 and go really saturated, or we can set it to 0 and turn it completely gray. So I'm going to set this back to 1. So if you already have a good understanding of what PBR materials are, what your albedo, roughness, specular, metallic, subsurface, all of these properties are doing, just skip ahead to the next video. But briefly, for anyone that's not familiar, I just want to touch on what PBR materials are before we go in and modify this.